Ladies and gentlemen, have you ever encountered a person who leaves you feeling completely drained after an interaction? Or perhaps you've noticed that some individuals seem to constantly take from you without ever giving anything in return. Today, we'll explore some of the subtle yet powerful ways in which our energy can be siphoned off by those around us and the inner dynamics that make this possible. There are subtle signs that your energy is being stolen, often not by any overt act, but rather through the unconscious patterns that emerge between you and others. These signs, if left unrecognized, can leave you feeling hollow, anxious, or inexplicably tired. First, let's consider the concept of the shadow. Every one of us has aspects of ourselves that we repress, qualities we deny or disown because they feel uncomfortable or unacceptable. These unacknowledged parts of ourselves, our shadows, tend to show up in the people we meet. Perhaps someone behaves in a way that triggers you, or they exhibit traits you find difficult to tolerate. It's not always their behavior that drains you, but your own reactivity to it. When we're confronted with our shadow through others, it awakens deep emotional responses, fear, frustration, or even anger, that consume our energy. These are the people who, knowingly or unknowingly, bring forth the parts of ourselves we don't want to face, thus leaving us energetically depleted. Secondly, consider the act of projection. We all have unresolved inner conflicts, unconscious fears or desires that we have not fully come to terms with. These hidden parts of our psyche can become projected onto others. When we project our unresolved emotional baggage, it creates an external conflict, often in the form of someone who mirrors these very issues back to us. This projection generates intense emotional reactions that drain us. It may not even be their actions or words, but the reflection of our own inner turmoil that pulls on our energy. The key here is recognizing that the conflict isn't about them. It's about what's unresolved within us. The energy we expend fighting this projection only leaves us more fatigued. Finally, let's examine unhealthy relational dynamics. We all know people who seem to take more than they give. Perhaps they demand too much of your time, your empathy, or your attention, yet offer little in return. These imbalanced relationships are energy drains. The constant one-way exchange where you give and give but receive little emotional nourishment is a subtle but persistent form of energy theft. Often, these individuals may not even be aware of the impact they have on you. The dynamic itself becomes a subtle force that leaves you feeling exhausted, empty, and overwhelmed. So what can we do to protect our energy in the face of these draining dynamics? First, we must become aware of the triggers, recognizing when we feel drained or exhausted after interacting with certain people. We must ask ourselves, what parts of me are being triggered? What unresolved issues are surfacing? By exploring our emotional responses, we begin to see the hidden dynamics at play and reclaim our energy. Second, we must practice healthy boundaries. We have the right to step back from relationships that drain us to protect our inner balance. This is not about cutting people off without reason, but rather understanding when we need to disengage or assert our limits for the sake of our well-being. Lastly, we must confront our own shadows and unresolved issues. When we become conscious of the parts of ourselves we've rejected, we no longer need to project them onto others. By embracing these hidden aspects, we free ourselves from the unconscious energy drain that comes from avoiding them. There is an unconscious force within each of us, a force that governs not only our behavior, but also the way we respond to the world around us. This force is often hidden from our conscious awareness, buried deep within our psyche, and it can have a profound impact on our energy, often in ways that we are not fully aware of. This hidden force is what we commonly refer to as the shadow. The shadow is an integral part of the human experience, an aspect of ourselves that contains those parts of our personality and traits that we repress or deny. These are the qualities, desires, or emotions that we deem unacceptable, undesirable, or even shameful. These qualities are often suppressed because they do not align with the ideal image of ourselves that we want to project to the world. It's not always conscious. Sometimes we are simply not aware of the traits that we suppress. But here's the catch. While we try to hide these parts of ourselves, they do not vanish. Instead, they become fragmented and pushed down into the unconscious mind. The more we deny them, the more they accumulate, festering in the background, waiting to make their presence known in subtle ways. And often, these denied aspects of ourselves will not only resurface when we least expect them, they will do so through our interactions with others, especially in ways that can be emotionally triggering. It's important to understand that the shadow is not inherently bad. In fact, it is a neutral aspect of the psyche. It consists of both negative and positive qualities. Qualities that, if embraced, can lead to personal growth, emotional balance, and a deeper understanding of who we truly are. However, when we refuse to acknowledge these aspects, when we push them away in fear or shame, the shadow grows darker, more potent, and more influential in our lives. It manifests itself through unconscious projections onto others, affecting our relationships and draining our energy. We've all experienced the sensation of being triggered by another person's behavior. Have you ever met someone who rubs you the wrong way, whose presence leaves you irritated, defensive, or even angry, despite there being no clear or logical reason for such strong feelings? This is often a sign that the person is activating a part of your shadow. The traits or behaviors they exhibit remind you of those very qualities you have suppressed within yourself. Qualities you may not want to face or acknowledge. The more you try to push these aspects of yourself away, the more likely you are to encounter them in the people around you. For instance, imagine you're in a conversation with someone who is excessively controlling. Maybe they micromanage every detail, insisting that things be done their way. Your immediate emotional response is one of irritation or frustration. You may find yourself feeling overwhelmed or helpless, drained by their need for control. But here's the catch. It's not just their behavior that is triggering you. It's the fact that their behavior mirrors a part of you that you might have denied or disowned. Perhaps your own tendencies toward control, perfectionism, or the need for certainty. In this situation, the other person is not consciously stealing your energy. Instead, they are simply acting as a mirror, reflecting a part of you that you refuse to acknowledge. In turn, your emotional reaction becomes an energy drain as you become caught up in the unconscious struggle against this part of yourself. The more you resist acknowledging these parts of your own psyche, the more intensely they may be projected onto others. You may find that people who embody your shadow qualities, whether it's arrogance, impulsiveness, insecurity, or dependency, seem to show up more frequently in your life, pushing your buttons and draining your energy. These projections are not malicious or deliberate. They are simply unconscious mechanisms at work. When you encounter these projections, you are left feeling irritated, upset, or emotionally exhausted, because, deep down, you are struggling with the fact that these qualities exist within you, even though you may not want to accept them. This is where the energy drain comes in. Every time you react to someone based on your projections, you expend precious emotional energy. You get caught in the drama, the conflict, or the struggle, but in the process you are also avoiding dealing with the parts of yourself that need attention. Instead of turning inward to explore why you are reacting so strongly, you focus outwardly on the person or situation that seems to be causing your distress. The more you do this, the more energy you lose, and the more difficult it becomes to break free from the cycle of unconscious projection. Furthermore, the shadow can drain your energy by causing you to feel confused, conflicted, or disconnected from your true self. Because these repressed parts of you are not being integrated into your conscious awareness, you may feel fragmented or at odds with yourself. You may struggle to understand why you feel uneasy or restless, even when everything on the surface seems fine. This inner tension is often the result of a disconnection between your conscious self and the unconscious parts of your psyche. The more disintegrated your sense of self becomes, the more energy you expend trying to maintain a facade, and the less energy you have left for growth, creativity, or genuine self-expression. What's more, the shadow can manifest in subtle ways that are difficult to recognize. Sometimes it shows up in the form of self-sabotage. Perhaps you find yourself procrastinating, avoiding important tasks, or making decisions that contradict your goals or values. At other times, it might manifest as feelings of guilt or shame, emotions that make it difficult to act authentically or to pursue your true desires. In these cases, The shadow is undermining your ability to fully engage with life, robbing you of the energy you need to create meaningful change or to move forward with purpose. The key to addressing the energy drain caused by the shadow is awareness. You must begin by noticing the patterns in your emotional responses, especially those that feel disproportionate or irrational. When you feel triggered, ask yourself, what part of me is being activated right now? What aspect of myself am I resisting or denying? This level of self-awareness is the first step toward integrating the shadow and reclaiming the energy that has been tied up in these unconscious projections. As you begin to embrace and integrate the shadow, you may find that your emotional responses become less intense and you begin to feel more at peace with yourself. Rather than projecting your shadow onto others, you can acknowledge it within yourself. You can begin to accept the parts of your personality that you once rejected, recognizing that they are simply human traits that exist within all of us. By doing so, you stop expending energy in resistance and start channeling that energy into growth, healing, and self-acceptance. In essence, the shadow is a powerful force that can either drain your energy or propel you toward greater self-understanding and personal transformation. The more you resist it, the more it will demand your attention through projections, conflicts, and emotional turmoil. But when you begin to face it, to embrace it, and to integrate it into your conscious awareness, you reclaim the energy that was once lost in fear, shame, and resistance. By accepting the shadow, you empower yourself to live with greater wholeness, authenticity, and balance, allowing you to step into a fuller, richer experience of life, free from the unconscious drain of unresolved inner conflicts. In the depths of our psyche, there exists a subtle mechanism that shapes not only the way we perceive others, but also the way we interact with them. This mechanism is called projection, and it is one of the most significant yet unconscious forces that can drain our energy without us even realizing it. Projection occurs when we unconsciously transfer our own thoughts, feelings, desires, and unresolved conflicts onto others, rather than acknowledging or addressing them within ourselves. As a result, we experience heightened emotional reactions to those around us, often without fully understanding why we feel the way we do. This process can be incredibly draining, both emotionally and physically, as it leads to unnecessary conflict, tension, and a disconnection from our true selves. The human mind, in its attempt to protect itself from uncomfortable emotions or traits, often resorts to projecting those qualities onto external sources. It is much easier to deal with a perceived flaw or fault in another person than to confront it within ourselves. For example, if we have a deep-seated fear of failure or insecurity, we might project these feelings onto someone else, seeing them as weak or inadequate. Similarly, if we have unresolved anger or resentment within, we may project these emotions onto others, believing they are the ones who are angry or unjust. By doing this, we avoid taking responsibility for our own emotions, and in the process, we end up creating unnecessary conflict that drains our energy and keeps us stuck in a cycle of projection. One of the most common forms of projection occurs when we unconsciously see in others what we cannot or will not acknowledge within ourselves. For instance, if we have a tendency toward perfectionism but have not fully accepted it, we may be quick to criticize or judge others for their imperfections. We may feel a sense of discomfort or frustration when someone else makes a mistake, because it reminds us of our own fear of being imperfect. Instead of recognizing that our frustration stems from our own inner struggle with perfectionism, we project those feelings onto the other person, blaming them for making mistakes that we secretly fear we could also make. This projection not only distorts our view of others, but it also leaves us feeling emotionally exhausted as we become entangled in the drama of judgment and criticism. This dynamic can play out in countless ways, both in personal relationships and in professional settings. For instance, if we have unresolved issues related to trust or abandonment, we may project these fears onto others, interpreting their behavior through the lens of our own insecurities. A person who is distant or uncommunicative might trigger feelings of abandonment within us, leading us to believe that they are neglecting us or intentionally withdrawing their affection. Instead of recognizing that our emotional reaction is rooted in our own past wounds, we project our fear of abandonment onto the other person, creating a sense of tension and anxiety in the relationship. In this way, projection can lead to misunderstandings, conflicts, and ultimately, a draining of our emotional energy as we are constantly reacting to the projections rather than addressing the underlying issues within ourselves. Projection can also manifest in more subtle and insidious ways, especially when it comes to how we view ourselves. When we project our own shortcomings onto others, we can create a distorted sense of reality in which we fail to recognize our own weaknesses or unresolved conflicts. For example, we might feel a deep sense of shame about our inability to set boundaries or assert ourselves in relationships. Rather than confronting this issue within ourselves, we may project our feelings of helplessness onto others, seeing them as controlling or manipulative. By doing so, we avoid taking responsibility for our own inability to assert ourselves, and instead we become consumed by our negative perceptions of others. This dynamic not only drains our energy, but also prevents us from growing or developing the skills needed to overcome the issue at hand. The energy drain caused by projection is not just about the emotional turbulence that it creates, it is also about the toll it takes on our mental and physical well-being. When we project our unresolved conflicts onto others, we are essentially engaging in a form of self-deception. We are avoiding the difficult work of self-reflection and self-awarenesses, which requires us to confront our fears, insecurities, and weaknesses head-on. Instead of looking inward, we turn our attention outward, focusing on the perceived faults and flaws of others. This constant distraction can leave us feeling scattered, unfocused, and disconnected from our true selves. We expend so much energy on managing the projections that we have little left to direct toward our personal growth or well-being. Furthermore, projection can lead to a profound sense of dissatisfaction with life. When we constantly project our inner conflicts onto the world around us, we create a reality in which we are perpetually at odds with others. We may feel misunderstood, judged, or unsupported because our projections distort the way we perceive our interactions. These distorted perceptions can lead to a sense of alienation as we struggle to make meaningful connections with others. We may find ourselves feeling increasingly isolated and disconnected, unable to see the true nature of our relationships because we are trapped in the grip of our own projections. This disconnection can be incredibly draining as it prevents us from experiencing the genuine connection, love, and support that we crave. It is also worth noting that projection can be self-perpetuating. Once we begin projecting our unresolved conflicts onto others, it becomes much harder to break the cycle. The more we project, the more we reinforce the beliefs and fears that underlie the projection. For example, if we project our own feelings of inadequacy onto others, we may start to believe that everyone around us sees us as inadequate. This belief can lead to further feelings of insecurity and self-doubt, which then fuels more projection. The cycle continues, and we find ourselves stuck in a loop of emotional turmoil and energy depletion. However, it is possible to break free from the draining effects of projection by developing greater self-awareness and emotional maturity. The first step is to recognize when we are projecting our unresolved conflicts onto others. This requires us to be honest with ourselves about our emotional reactions and to ask the difficult question, why am I reacting this way? When we are triggered by someone else's behavior, we must take a step back and examine the deeper emotions that are being stirred within us. Are we projecting our own fears, insecurities, or desires onto them? Are we avoiding a difficult truth about ourselves? By asking these questions, we can begin to see our projections for what they are and take responsibility for our own emotional landscape. Once we recognize that projection is at play, we can begin the process of self-integration. This means acknowledging the parts of ourselves that we have been avoiding or suppressing and taking steps to heal and integrate those aspects. Instead of projecting our unresolved conflicts onto others, we can begin to embrace them within ourselves, recognizing that they are a natural part of the human experience. This process requires patience, self-compassion, and a willingness to face our fears and insecurities head-on. But by doing so, we reclaim our energy, break free from the cycle of projection, and create space for healthier, more authentic relationships. Ultimately, projection is one of the most powerful and draining psychological mechanisms that can influence our relationships and our emotional well-being. By becoming more aware of how projection operates in our lives, we can begin to understand the ways in which our unresolved conflicts drain our energy. Through greater self-awareness, self-reflection, and emotional healing, we can break free from the grip of projection, reclaim our energy, and move toward a more integrated and authentic way of being. In every relationship, there exists an exchange of energy, sometimes subtle, sometimes overt. Whether it's in personal or professional relationships, we continuously give and receive emotional, physical, and mental energy. Ideally, this exchange is balanced. We invest in others and receive nourishment, support, and care in return. However, many relationships are not so harmonious. Some become sources of exhaustion and depletion rather than mutual exchange, leading to an energy imbalance that can be both draining and overwhelming. These one-sided dynamics often go unnoticed, and yet they silently drain our vitality over time, leaving us feeling emotionally fatigued, disconnected, and drained. One of the primary contributors to such energetic imbalance is the nature of certain relationships in which one party consistently takes more than they give. This pattern is particularly prevalent in relationships where boundaries are either poorly defined or completely ignored. When you find yourself constantly giving, whether it be your time, attention, resources, or emotional support, and receiving little or nothing in return, the relationship becomes parasitic rather than reciprocal. The result is an energy drain that slowly depletes your reserves, leaving you feeling spent and empty, sometimes without even knowing why. These unhealthy dynamics often take root in relationships where there is an imbalance of power. For instance, consider a scenario where one person in the relationship continually demands attention, affection, or assistance, while the other person is left to meet those demands at the expense of their own needs. At first, this may seem harmless and perhaps even natural. We all go through periods in our lives when we need extra help or support, and it's normal to lean on others when times are tough. However, the problem arises when the exchange becomes skewed, and one person becomes a perpetual giver while the other takes without offering anything in return. Over time, this one-sided dynamic wears on the person who is constantly giving, as their needs and desires go unacknowledged. Their energy is drained as they pour themselves into the other person without receiving the emotional or physical replenishment they require. The emotional toll of such relationships is particularly insidious. Emotional labor is not always visible, yet it is profoundly draining. When you are the person in a relationship who continually gives, you may find yourself constantly managing the emotional state of the other person, providing comfort, support, or validation, often without any acknowledgement of your own emotional needs. This can leave you feeling emotionally depleted, as if you are pouring from an empty cup. At first, you might feel fulfilled by helping and caring for someone else, but over time, as your emotional resources are exhausted and left untended, the relationship begins to feel less like a partnership and more like an emotional burden. The imbalance of energy can take on various forms. For example, in a friendship, one person may constantly be in need of support, yet never offer any in return. They might confide in you about their problems, ask for your advice, or expect you to be there for them during difficult times, but when you are struggling, they seem to vanish or offer little empathy. Similarly, in romantic relationships, one partner might continuously demand attention, affection, or reassurance, while failing to acknowledge or meet the needs of the other. The constant effort to maintain the emotional equilibrium of the other person can feel exhausting, and it can drain the vitality of the person who is constantly giving. In professional environments, this type of imbalance can also be present. Perhaps you have a colleague or boss who constantly demands more of your time or energy, leaving you with little space for your own priorities or well-being. The emotional exhaustion that comes from such relationships can often be masked by the external pressures of work, making it difficult to recognize how these dynamics are depleting you. You might be asked to take on more responsibilities, handle difficult situations, or provide solutions to problems that are not yours to solve. Over time, the lack of balance can leave you feeling like you are constantly running on empty, unable to fulfill your own needs because you are too focused on meeting the demands of others. One of the more damaging aspects of these energy-draining dynamics is the gradual erosion of your sense of self. When you constantly give without receiving, You begin to lose touch with your own needs, desires, and aspirations. The more you focus on others' needs and pour energy into maintaining their well-being, the less time and energy you have for your own growth and self-care. This can lead to feelings of burnout, dissatisfaction, and disconnection from your own inner life. You might feel as though you are caught in a never-ending cycle of pleasing others, never feeling fully seen or appreciated for who you are, but instead existing as an extension of someone else's emotional world. As energy imbalances deepen in a relationship, it can create a sense of resentment. The person who is giving constantly might feel taken for granted, overlooked, or exploited. This resentment often builds slowly like a quiet undercurrent until it becomes impossible to ignore. Even if you don't outwardly express it, the internal emotional burden continues to grow, and this resentment slowly saps your energy and enthusiasm for the relationship. This is when the real toll on your well-being begins to manifest, when the emotional exhaustion transforms into a lingering sense of frustration and bitterness. You may find yourself withdrawing, disengaging, or even feeling apathetic, unable to summon the energy needed to continue investing in the relationship. Sometimes, these imbalanced dynamics are not immediately recognized because the taker in the relationship may disguise their behavior under the guise of needing help, emotional support, or guidance. In these cases, it can be difficult to distinguish between genuine needs and manipulative behaviors. The person who constantly takes may genuinely feel as though they need your support, but if their requests are continuous and without reciprocity, it becomes a drain on your energy. The emotional toll becomes even greater if the taker fails to acknowledge the imbalance, leaving the giver feeling as though their own needs are invisible, even though they are investing all of their energy into supporting the other person. At times, these relationships can be so deeply ingrained that they feel impossible to change. You might feel trapped, unable to assert your own needs without feeling guilty or selfish. The fear of upsetting the other person or disrupting the dynamic can prevent you from addressing the imbalance directly. This is why it's crucial to recognize the signs of energy depletion early, before the resentment or exhaustion becomes too overwhelming to manage. Breaking free from these energy-draining dynamics requires conscious effort and boundary setting. It is important to recognize when a relationship is imbalanced and to understand that it is not selfish to prioritize your own well-being. Setting healthy boundaries is key to protecting your energy. This might mean saying no when you are asked to take on more responsibilities that you are not comfortable with, or it might involve taking time for yourself to recharge, even if others may not understand. Healthy boundaries are essential for maintaining emotional and physical balance in relationships, and they allow you to continue giving without draining yourself in the process. In addition to setting boundaries, it's important to engage in self-reflection to understand why you are allowing such imbalances to persist. Are there fears or limiting beliefs that prevent you from asserting your needs? Do you feel obligated to give in order to be loved or accepted? These underlying patterns can often keep us stuck in unhealthy dynamics. Once we become aware of these deeper motivations, we can begin to heal and shift the relationship to one of greater balance and mutual respect. It's also essential to recognize that not all relationships are meant to be equally balanced at all times. There will be moments when one person needs more support, and that's natural. However, the key lies in the overall dynamic and whether the relationship allows space for both individuals to give and receive. True emotional nourishment comes from reciprocal, balanced connections where both parties can support and uplift each other. Ultimately, relationships should be sources of energy and growth, not depletion and burnout. By recognizing the signs of unhealthy dynamics and making the necessary changes, whether it's setting boundaries, engaging in honest communication, or re-evaluating the relationship, you can create a more balanced exchange that nourishes both yourself and others. In doing so, you reclaim your energy, your sense of self, and your emotional well-being.